I turned 62 on a Tuesday. I remember that detail because Tuesdays were always Robert's favorite day. "Middle of the week," he used to say, stirring his coffee with that slow, deliberate motion I can still see when I close my eyes. Far enough from Monday to breathe, close enough to Friday to hope. He made everything sound like poetry, even the mundane, even Tuesdays. He's been gone 4 years now. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days. But who's counting? I woke that morning at 6:15, the same time I've woken every day for 40 years. The house was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of quiet that presses against your ears like cotton wool. The kind that reminds you no one else is breathing in these rooms. I made myself get up, shower, put on the blue cardigan Robert always said brought out my eyes. A little lipstick, even though no one would see it. Because today was my birthday, and I refused to let it feel like just another day. The breakfast nook has a wide bay window that looks out over the backyard, where the willow tree Robert planted on our 20th anniversary has grown thick and sprawling. I set the table the way my mother taught me. Cloth napkin, real silverware, a small vase with a single rose from the garden. One place setting, just one. But I made it beautiful anyway. Coffee, toast with the strawberry jam I made last summer, a small bowl of fruit. I sat down at exactly 8 a.m. and waited. The phone stayed silent. I checked it once, twice. The screen was bright and empty. No missed calls, no messages, no happy birthday mom with a string of heart emojis from Caleb. No awkward HBD Eleanor from Tiffany, which was all I ever got from her anyway. But at least it was something. By 9:30, the coffee had gone cold. Coffee had gone. I wrapped my hands around the mug anyway, feeling the ceramic against my palms, trying to fill the silence with small sensations. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, a cardinal singing outside, oblivious and cheerful. Nothing from my son. I want you to understand something. I am not a needy woman. I raised Caleb to be independent. I never called too often, never showed up unannounced, never made demands. After Robert died, I was careful, so careful, not to become a burden. I read the articles about overbearing mothers-in-law. I gave them space. I wrote checks instead of giving advice. I smiled when Tiffany canceled plans at the last minute. I learned to say, "Oh, that's fine, sweetheart," until the words lost all meaning. But it was my birthday, just one day. Was it too much to ask for a phone call? At 10 a.m., I did something I'm not proud of. I opened the family group chat, the one Caleb created 2 years ago, the one where I only ever sent photos of the garden and received thumbs-up reactions in return, and I typed a message. My fingers trembled. I felt pathetic. I felt 62 years old in the worst possible way. "Hey guys, feeling a bit down today because no one remembered my birthday." I stared at those words for a full minute before pressing send. There was a lump in my throat the size of a walnut. My mother would have been ashamed of me, begging for attention like this. But I sent it anyway, because some foolish part of me still believed that my son loved me, that he'd see the message and feel terrible, that he'd call immediately, apologizing, promising to come over with flowers and a cake and the girls. Lily and Rose, my granddaughters. 8 years old, with Robert's dark curls and my nose. I hadn't seen them in 3 months. Tiffany always had a reason. The message showed as delivered, then read. I watched the little indicator change and felt my heartbeat in my temples. 3 dots appeared. Someone was typing. I held my breath. The message came through at 10:07 a.m. I remember because I glanced at the clock right before my world cracked in half. It was from Tiffany. "Eleanor, we are overwhelmed. We need some space from you. Please don't reach out anymore." I read it 3 times. The words didn't make sense. Space? I'd given them nothing but space. I saw them once a month when Tiffany allowed it. I never criticized her parenting. I never commented on the way she spoke to Caleb, sharp and dismissive, like he was an employee who kept making mistakes. I funded their entire life and asked for nothing except a few hours with my grandchildren and a phone call on holidays. And now she wanted space? My hands were shaking. The phone nearly slipped from my grip. I was about to call Caleb. Surely he would explain. Surely this was some misunderstanding. When another notification appeared. A small icon. A reaction to Tiffany's message. A thumbs up. A like. From Caleb. I stared at that tiny symbol until my vision blurred. My son, my only child, the boy I nursed through fevers and heartbreaks and failures, had just endorsed his wife telling me to disappear. On my birthday, with a thumbs-up emoji, like she'd posted a photo of her lunch. The pain hit me like a physical blow. It started in my chest and radiated outward, a cold, spreading numbness that made my fingers tingle and my breath catch. I think I made a sound, a small, wounded thing, but I couldn't be sure because my ears were ringing. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. The coffee grew colder. The cardinal stopped singing. The house pressed its silence against me like a judgment. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted. I thought about Robert, about what he'd say if he could see this, about the trust he'd built so carefully with all its clauses and protections because he knew that money made people ugly, made. "You're too trusting, Ellie," he used to say. "Too good. Promise me you'll protect yourself when I'm gone." I promised. And then I'd spent 4 years breaking that promise. 1 canceled dinner and 1 emergency loan and 1 dismissive text at a time. The sadness was still there. But now there was something else underneath it. Something colder, harder. Like steel being forged in a fire I hadn't known was burning. I picked up my phone, not to call, not to beg. I opened my banking app, and I began to count. I didn't cry that day. I want you to know that because later, when everything unraveled, Tiffany would tell people I was hysterical and unstable. She'd paint me as a bitter old woman who couldn't handle being told no. But the truth is, I sat at my breakfast table for 3 hours on my 62nd birthday, and I didn't shed a single tear. I was too busy doing math. The banking app glowed on my phone screen as I scrolled through 4 years of transaction history. 4 years of loving my son with my checkbook since he wouldn't let me love him any other way. The mortgage payments came first. $4,200 every month, automatically withdrawn from the trust account, deposited directly into their joint account so Caleb and Tiffany could pay the bank. I'd set it up that way because Tiffany said it made them feel more independent. I wanted to laugh at that now, independent, as if independence meant spending someone else's money with extra steps. Then the car leases, Tiffany's white Mercedes, Caleb's gunmetal BMW, $1,800 a month combined. Tiffany had insisted they needed 2 nice cars because of the image required for Caleb's job. Caleb worked in insurance. I didn't realize insurance required German engineering, but what did I know? The private school tuition. $52,000 a year for Lily and Rose to attend Whitfield Academy, where the waiting list was 3 years long unless you made the right donation. I made the donation. Of course I did. They were my granddaughters, and I wanted them to have every opportunity. Tiffany never thanked me. She complained once that the uniforms were scratchy, credit card payments. Allowance, Tiffany called it. $3,000 a month for whatever she wanted, clothes, lunches, spa days. I saw charges from Nordstrom, Sephora, a place called Glow Wellness that seemed to sell very expensive juice. And the loans. Oh, the loans. I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop, the same laptop Robert used to do our taxes, and I started a list. Every time Caleb had called me with an emergency, the roof leak that turned out to be a kitchen renovation, the car accident that turned out to be a down payment on a boat, the temporary cash flow issue that somehow lasted 18 months. I'd kept telling myself he'd pay me back. He always said he would. Soon, Mom. As soon as things settle down. Things never settled down. They just got more expensive. The total, when I finished adding it up, was $847,000. I sat back in my chair, and let that number sink in. $847,000. Almost $1 million. Gone into a household that couldn't be bothered to send me a text on my birthday. The grandfather clock chimed 3. I hadn't eaten since that single piece of toast. My stomach was hollow, but I couldn't tell if it was hunger or something else. I thought about calling Robert's attorney, Frank, but first, I needed to understand how deep this went. And for that, I needed Manny. Emmanuel Reyes picked up on the second ring. Ellie. His voice was gruff, warm. He'd worked with Robert for 20 years at the firm before retiring. When Robert was diagnosed with cancer the first time, the time we beat it, Manny had been the one to drive him to chemotherapy because I was recovering from my own surgery. He called me every year on Robert's death anniversary just to check in. "How are you, sweetheart? Happy birthday, by the way." Of course, Manny remembered. "I need your help," I said, the professional kind. There was a pause. I heard him shift, maybe sitting up straighter. "What happened?" I told him. The text, the reply, the thumbs up, the silence that followed. I kept my voice steady because if I let it shake, I might not be able to stop. When I finished, Manny exhaled slowly. That boy. Robert would have taken a belt to him. Robert would have handled this better than me. Robert would have handled it exactly the same way you're about to. Another pause. "What do you need, Ellie?" "I need to know what I'm dealing with. I have a feeling this goes deeper than Tiffany being cruel. There's something coordinated about it. The timing, the way Victor's been circling lately, asking about the trust." "Victor Hale?" "Robert's brother, yes." Manny made a sound of distaste. He'd never liked Victor. Nobody who knew Robert well ever did. Victor had spent his whole life being the lesser brother, less successful, less charming, less loved. He wore his resentment like cheap cologne. "I'll look into it," Manny said. "Give me a few days. And Ellie?" "Yes?" "Don't do anything yet. Don't tip them off. Can you do that?" I looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop, at the number $847,000 glowing on the screen. "I can wait." "Good. I'll call you Thursday." He called Wednesday. "You need to come to my office," he said. His voice was different, flatter. "And Ellie, prepare yourself." I drove to Manny's place in Hartford, a modest building with a view of the river. He met me at the door with a cup of coffee and a look in his eyes that made my stomach clench. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, screenshots, printouts of text messages. "Your housekeeper," he said. "Chelsea Warren, Tiffany's sister." I blinked. "Tiffany doesn't have a—" "She does. Half-sister, different fathers. They kept it quiet on purpose." Manny tapped one of the printouts. "Chelsea's been reporting to Tiffany for over a year. Your schedule, your visitors, what you eat, what you watch, when you leave the house." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Chelsea. Quiet Chelsea, who always asked how I was feeling, who made me tea without being asked, who I'd given a Christmas bonus last year because she seemed like she was struggling. "There's more." Manny's jaw tightened. "I got into their group chat." "How?" "You don't want to know. What matters is what's in it." He handed me a stack of printed screenshots. The chat was called The Real Fam with a laughing emoji. The members were listed at the top. Tiffany, Caleb, Victor, Chelsea, Nolan. Everyone except me. I read slowly. My hands didn't shake. I wouldn't let them, but something cold was spreading through my chest. Tiffany. She's so pathetic. Sitting in that big house waiting for us to call. It's honestly sad. Victor. Just keep her happy until we figure out the trust situation. Nolan. How much longer do we have to pretend? Chelsea. She asked about the girls again today. I told her they had the flu lol. And then, from Caleb. My son. My boy. Can we not talk about my mom right now? It makes me feel weird. Tiffany. Then stop reading and let the adults handle it. He didn't respond after that. I set the papers down. My vision was blurry, but I still wasn't crying. There was something beyond tears now, a place I'd never been before, where grief and fury lived side by side. "There's something else," Manny said quietly. "Victor's been meeting with a lawyer, not Frank, someone in New York who specializes in trust disputes. He's looking for ways to challenge your authority as trustee. He can't. Robert made sure of that. He's trying anyway. And Ellie?" Manny leaned forward. "He's not doing it alone. Tiffany's been coaching him. They've been planning this for 2 years. 2 years. While I wrote checks and smiled through cancellations and pretended everything was fine." I stood up, gathering the folder. "I need to see Frank." "What are you going to do?" I looked at Manny. This man who'd known Robert, who knew me, who understood exactly what kind of woman I was beneath the cardigans and the silence. "I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for," I said. "Space." Frank Delgado's office smelled exactly like it had when Robert was alive. Old leather, fresh coffee, and the faint mustiness of books that had been read and loved and read again. The walls were lined with law volumes dating back to the 1940s, most of them inherited from Frank's father, who had built this practice from nothing. Robert always said you could trust a man whose office smelled like history. I sat in the worn leather chair across from Frank's desk, the same chair I'd sat in when we signed our wills, when we created the trust, when Robert made me promise I'd take care of myself after he was gone. Frank looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone fully silver now, and his hands had a slight tremor when he reached for his coffee cup. But his eyes were sharp as ever, dark and knowing, taking in everything I wasn't saying. "You should have called me sooner," he said, after I finished explaining. The folder from Manny sat open between us, the screenshots, the evidence, the betrayal laid out in black and white. I didn't want to believe it. "I know." He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Robert worried about this, about Victor especially. That's why he built the trust the way he did." "Tell me again." "I need to hear it." Frank opened a thick file, my file, the Mitchell Family Trust, and spread the documents across his desk. I watched his weathered fingers trace the paragraphs Robert had insisted on, the clauses I'd barely understood at the time. First, the sole discretion provision. Frank tapped a highlighted section. "You have absolute authority over all distributions. No beneficiary can compel you to give them a single dollar. No court can override your decisions as long as you're mentally competent, which," he glanced at me with a wry smile, "you clearly are. And Victor's lawyer? The one looking for loopholes? He'll find nothing. Robert spent 6 months with me crafting this language. It's airtight." I felt something loosen in my chest. Robert, even now, even 4 years gone, he was still protecting me. "Second," Frank continued, "the character clause. This is the one they don't know about. Robert insisted we keep it out of the summary documents. Any beneficiary who demonstrates documented cruelty, financial exploitation, or conspiracy against the surviving spouse can be permanently removed from the trust. Permanently, Eleanor. Not suspended. Removed. And I have documentation now." "You have more than documentation. You have a conspiracy in writing." He gestured at Manny's folder. "This isn't just cruelty. This is coordinated financial exploitation. Victor's been taking a consulting fee for 4 years while actively working to undermine you. That alone is grounds for removal." I thought of Victor's smug face at Robert's funeral, the way he'd patted my hand and told me not to worry, that he'd help manage things, the way I'd smiled and thanked him because I was too deep in grief to see the wolf in front of me. "And the third clause?" I asked. "The emergency revocation power. You can freeze all automatic payments with 24 hours notice. No explanation required. No appeal process." Frank leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Eleanor, you have every legal right to cut them off tomorrow. Today, if you want. I can file the paperwork within the hour." "Not yet." He raised an eyebrow. "No? I don't just want to cut them off. I want them to know why. I want them to sit in a room and hear exactly what they did and understand that they did this to themselves. I met Frank's gaze. I want them to watch it happen. A slow smile spread across Frank's face. The first real smile I'd seen from him since I arrived. Robert always said you were the dangerous one. He was the one with the temper. But you were the one who planned. Can we do it legally? A meeting with you present where I amend the trust in front of them? We can do anything you want. It's your trust. He pulled out a legal pad and began writing. What did you have in mind? I called Tiffany first. It was a performance, and I gave it everything I had. The slightly trembling voice, the apologetic tone, the careful humility of a woman who had learned her lesson. Tiffany, dear, I've been thinking about what you said, about needing space. I paused, letting the silence stretch. You were right. I've been too involved, too clingy. I could almost hear her preening on the other end of the line. Well, Eleanor, I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly. I am, and I want to make it up to you, to everyone. I took a breath, steadying myself. I've been talking to Frank, Robert's attorney, about the trust. I'm getting older, and I think it's time to update some things. Make sure everyone is taken care of properly. The pause on her end was electric. I could practically hear the dollar signs clicking in her mind. Update the trust? Her voice was carefully neutral, but I knew that tone. That was Tiffany smelling money. What kind of updates? Well, I'd rather discuss it in person, with the whole family. I was thinking we could have a little meeting here at the house. Next Saturday? Frank would be there to explain the legal details, and afterward we could have lunch. I'll make Robert's pot roast. Caleb always loved that. Yes, I think we could make that work. Wonderful. And Tiffany, please invite Victor and Nolan too. They're family, and I want everyone included. Another pause. She was suspicious. Tiffany was always suspicious, but greed was winning. It always did with her. Of course, Eleanor, we'll all be there. Thank you, dear. And Tiffany, I'm sorry for everything. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness. From something else entirely. Something that felt like power. The days before the meeting passed slowly, each one heavy with anticipation. Chelsea came on Thursday to clean, same as always. She moved through my house with that quiet efficiency I used to find comforting, running her cloth over Robert's antiques, vacuuming the carpets, asking if I needed anything from the store. I watched her differently now. Every smile, every question, every concerned glance, I saw the calculation behind it, the reports she would send to Tiffany, the way she catalogued my movements like a warden tracking a prisoner. I decided to test her. Chelsea, dear, I said, settling into the armchair in the living room with a cup of tea. I'm thinking of making some changes around here. Big changes. She paused her dusting, her back still turned to me. Oh? What kind of changes? I'm meeting with my financial advisor next week. I'm considering selling the house. I watched her shoulders tense, just slightly, just for a moment. Then she turned with that practiced smile. Really? That's a big decision, Mrs. Mitchell. It is, but I'm getting older, and this house is so much work. Maybe it's time for something smaller. A condo in Florida, perhaps. Near the beach. That sounds lovely, Chelsea said, her voice sweet as antifreeze. She finished her work in record time that day, rushing through the last of the dusting with barely concealed urgency. I sat in my chair and sipped my tea and watched her go. 11 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Caleb's number, but I knew the words were Tiffany's. Mom, we heard you might be selling the house. Let's talk about this at the meeting. Don't make any decisions yet. I smiled, the first real smile since my birthday. That evening, the confirmations rolled in one by one. Tiffany and Caleb, Victor, Chelsea. Even Nolan, who I'd barely spoken to in years, suddenly found time in his schedule. They were coming. All of them. Drawn by the promise of money, the scent of inheritance, the hope that my apology meant I was ready to open my wallet even wider. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright, the October sun cutting through the windows like a blade. I woke at 5 a.m., hours before anyone would arrive. The house was silent, except for the familiar creaks and sighs of old wood settling, sounds I'd learned to read like a language over 40 years. Robert used to say the house talked to us, told us its secrets if we listened. That morning, it seemed to be holding its breath. I showered and dressed with more care than I had in months. The navy dress Robert bought me for our 35th anniversary, elegant, understated, the kind of dress that said I had nothing to prove. My mother's pearls, the ones she wore on her wedding day, cool against my collarbone. Minimal makeup, just enough to look polished. I wanted them to see me clearly. I wanted there to be no distractions. The dining room took an hour to prepare. I used the good china, Robert's grandmother's set, the one with the delicate blue pattern around the edges. Crystal water glasses, cloth napkins folded into precise triangles. At the head of the table I placed a single folder, thick with documents. Frank would sit to my right, his briefcase full of copies for everyone. I set 6 places, one for Tiffany, one for Caleb, one for Victor, one for Nolan, one for Chelsea, and one for me. At 9:30, Frank's Lincoln pulled into the driveway. I watched him from the window, the slow, deliberate way he walked, the leather briefcase tucked under his arm like a weapon. He looked like what he was, a man who had spent 50 years watching families destroy themselves over money and who had long ago stopped being surprised by any of it. "You ready?" he asked when I opened the door. "I've been ready for 4 years. I just didn't know it." He nodded, something like respect in his eyes. "Robert would be proud of you, Eleanor. Robert would have handled this differently. He would have yelled, made a scene. And you?" I smoothed the front of my dress, feeling the familiar weight of the pearls against my throat. "I'm going to be very, very quiet. That's what scares them more." The doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m. Tiffany came through the door first, of course. She was wearing a cream cashmere sweater and camel trousers, her blonde hair blown out to perfection, her smile wide and warm and utterly false. She embraced me like we were old friends, a cloud of expensive perfume, a kiss that landed somewhere near my cheek. "Eleanor, you look wonderful. Doesn't she look wonderful, Caleb?" Caleb stood behind her, half hidden in her shadow. He was wearing the blue button-down I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago, and the sight of it made something twist in my chest. He looked tired. There were circles under his eyes I didn't remember seeing before. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. I searched his face for something, guilt, love, shame, anything, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just shuffled past me into the house, shoulders hunched like a man walking into a storm. Victor arrived next, all false heartiness and too strong cologne. He pumped Frank's hand like they were old friends, even though Frank had always despised him. "Frank, good to see you. Eleanor, sweetheart, thank you for including me." He leaned in to kiss my cheek, and I let him, keeping my expression pleasant and blank. Chelsea came in behind him, small and mousy, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. She knew something was wrong. I could see it in the way she clutched her purse, the way she avoided looking at me directly. Nolan brought up the rear, already glancing at his phone, radiating the bored entitlement of a man who had never worked for anything in his life. "Nice place," he said to no one in particular. "Very vintage." I led them to the dining room, watched them take in the formal table setting, the crystal glasses, the folder at the head of the table. Tiffany's eyes lingered on that folder a moment too long. "Please, sit," I said. "Frank has some things to explain before we eat." They arranged themselves around the table, Tiffany and Caleb on one side, Victor and Nolan on the other, Chelsea at the far end like she was trying to disappear. Frank sat to my right, opening his briefcase with the slow precision of a surgeon preparing his instruments. "Thank you all for coming," Frank began, his voice carrying the weight of decades in courtrooms. Eleanor has asked me to review the Mitchell Family Trust and explain some updates she's considering. Tiffany leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright. Victor was already nodding, eager, greedy. As you know, Robert Mitchell created this trust before his passing to provide for his family. Eleanor, as the surviving spouse, serves as sole trustee with complete discretionary authority over all distributions. He paused, letting that sink in. I watched their faces, the careful neutrality, the barely concealed anticipation. The trust currently provides significant support to several family members: monthly mortgage assistance, vehicle payments, educational expenses, various personal allowances. Tiffany was practically vibrating now. She thought this was the moment. The announcement of increased distributions, maybe a lump sum, maybe a promise of more to come. However, Frank continued, and something in his tone shifted, Eleanor has recently become aware of certain circumstances that require her to exercise the protective clauses Robert built into this trust. The room went still. I'm sorry, Victor said, his smile faltering. Protective clauses? Frank pulled a document from his briefcase. Clause 7.3, known as the character clause. I'll read the relevant portion. He cleared his throat. Any beneficiary who demonstrates documented cruelty, financial exploitation, or conspiracy against the surviving spouse may be permanently removed from all trust benefits at the sole discretion of the trustee. Tiffany's face went pale. Beside her, Caleb finally looked up, confusion and dawning horror in his eyes. Eleanor has provided me with extensive documentation, Frank continued, his voice calm and devastating, including screenshots from a private group chat called The Real Fam, in which multiple beneficiaries discussed strategies to manipulate her, mocked her emotional state, and coordinated efforts to undermine her authority as trustee. He opened the folder in front of me, the one they'd all been staring at, and began distributing copies of the screenshots. One for Tiffany, one for Victor, one for Chelsea, one for Nolan. I watched their faces as they looked at their own words, their own cruelty, printed in black and white. Therefore, Frank said, effective immediately, the following individuals are permanently removed from the Mitchell Family Trust. He read the names slowly, deliberately. Victor Hale, for accepting consulting fees while actively conspiring to challenge the trustee's authority. Victor's face went purple. This is outrageous. I'll sue. You'll do nothing, Frank said calmly. The clause is ironclad. Robert made sure of it. Chelsea Warren, for serving as a covert informant and violating the trustee's privacy. Chelsea burst into tears, her shoulders shaking. She didn't even try to deny it. Nolan Hale, for participating in the conspiracy and receiving fraudulent benefits. Nolan's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked at his father, helpless, but Victor was too busy sputtering to notice. And Tiffany Mitchell. I spoke for the first time, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, for orchestrating all of it. Tiffany's head snapped toward me, her mask finally crumbling. The pleasant daughter-in-law was gone. In her place was something ugly, something furious, something real. You can't do this, she hissed. Caleb, tell her she can't do this. But Caleb wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the screenshots in front of him, at the messages he'd tried to ignore, at the evidence of what his wife really was. And then, slowly, everyone turned to look at him. He was the only one whose name hadn't been called. The silence after Tiffany's name lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the room exploded. Victor was on his feet first, his chair scraping against the hardwood with a shriek. This is illegal! You can't just— Robert would never have wanted— I'll have my lawyer here within the hour. Your lawyer, Frank said, not even bothering to stand, has already reviewed the trust documents. I spoke with him yesterday. He advised you to accept the decision gracefully. A pause. I don't believe you'll take that advice, but I wanted you to know you've already lost. Chelsea was sobbing openly now, her mascara running in dark rivers down her cheeks. Mrs. Mitchell, please, I didn't mean. Tiffany said it was just to help. She said you were confused and needed looking after. I never meant to. You reported my movements for a year, I said quietly. You told her when I cried. You told her when I looked at old photographs. You told her I talked to Robert's picture in the hallway. I let that sit between us. You made my grief into entertainment for them. Chelsea's sobs turned to hiccups. She couldn't look at me. Nolan had gone pale, his phone forgotten on the table. Dad, he kept saying, tugging at Victor's sleeve like a child. Dad, what do we do? But I wasn't watching any of them. I was watching my son. Caleb sat frozen, the screenshots still clutched in his hands. His eyes moved back and forth across the printed messages, his wife's cruelty, his uncle's scheming, his own weak protests that had changed nothing. Caleb, I said, and the room went quiet again. He looked up. There were tears in his eyes, the first I'd seen from him since Robert's funeral. You noticed I didn't read your name. He nodded, unable to speak. That's because you're not removed. Not yet. I folded my hands on the table, keeping my voice steady, even though my heart was cracking. You're on probation. 6 months. What you do in that time will determine whether you remain in this family. Not just the trust, but the family. My family. Robert's family. Eleanor. Tiffany's voice was sharp, dangerous. Don't you dare try to manipulate him. Caleb, she's doing exactly what I told you she would. She's using money to control you. I turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since she'd walked through my door. Tiffany, I said, I have never once used money to control anyone. I used money to help, to support, to love when you wouldn't let me love any other way. I gestured at the screenshots scattered across the table. You're the one who saw dollar signs where a family should have been? Her face contorted, the careful beauty twisting into something feral. You have no idea what it's been like, playing nice with you for years, sitting through your boring dinners, listening to your stories about Robert, pretending to care about your stupid garden. Tiffany, Caleb said, his voice cracking. Stop. But she couldn't stop. The mask was gone, and what lay beneath had been waiting too long to stay hidden. You think you're so special because Robert left you money? You're nothing. You're a sad old woman in a sad old house, and the only reason anyone tolerated you was because of what you could give us. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You should have seen the group chat after your birthday. We laughed for hours, feeling a bit down. God, it was pathetic. The room was utterly silent. Even Victor had stopped blustering, watching his co-conspirator self-destruct with something like horror. Tiffany. Caleb's voice was stronger now, shaking but firm. I said stop. She whirled on him. Don't you dare take her side. After everything I've done for you. What have you done for me? He stood up slowly, the screenshots falling from his hands. You've cut me off from my mother. You've spent her money while making fun of her behind her back. You've lied to me for years about who you really are. I made you better. I made you successful. Without me, you'd still be that pathetic mama's boy who couldn't make a decision without calling home. I watched my son's face as his wife spoke. Watched the scales falling from his eyes, one by one. Watched him see her clearly, maybe for the first time. I think, he said quietly, that I'd rather be that person than whoever I've become with you. Tiffany's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For once in her life, she had no words. I stood up. The movement was small, but it commanded attention. Everyone turned to look at me. This 62-year-old woman in her mother's pearls, who had been underestimated and dismissed and mocked, and who was still standing. We're done here, I said. Chelsea, you're terminated. Please leave your key on the table by the door. I'll mail your final check. Chelsea nodded, tears still streaming, and fled without another word. Victor. I turned to my brother-in-law, who had deflated like a punctured balloon. The consulting fee Robert set up was meant to keep peace in the family. There is no peace anymore, so there's no fee. It ended the moment you started scheming with my daughter-in-law. You should have gotten a real job 20 years ago. It's not too late to start. Victor opened his mouth to protest, but something in my expression stopped him. He grabbed Nolan by the arm and pulled him toward the door, muttering threats that both of us knew were empty. Tiffany. She was still standing by her chair, vibrating with rage, fists clenched at her sides. You got what you wanted. Space. Enjoy it. This isn't over, she snarled. I'll fight this, You'll do what you've always done. You'll scheme and manipulate and try to find an angle. I stepped closer to her, close enough to see the tiny lines around her eyes that her expensive creams couldn't quite hide. But here's what you don't understand, Tiffany. Robert built this trust to protect me from people like you. Every clause, every provision, every failsafe, it was all designed for this exact moment. You never had a chance. You just didn't know it. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, heels clicking furiously against the hardwood. At the threshold, she turned back. Caleb, we're leaving. Now. Caleb hadn't moved. He stood by the table, looking lost, looking young, looking like the little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. Caleb. Tiffany's voice was ice. I said now. Slowly, he walked toward her. My heart sank. After everything, he was still choosing her. But as he passed me, I reached out and pressed something into his hand. A photograph, small, worn at the edges, kept in my wallet for 30 years. Caleb at 6 years old, sitting on Robert's shoulders, both of them laughing at something I'd said. The happiest moment I could find. You know where to find me, I whispered, when you're ready. His fingers closed around the photo. He didn't look at me, couldn't look at me, but I saw his jaw tighten. Saw him slip the picture into his pocket, away from Tiffany's eyes. Then they were gone. The front door slammed. A car engine roared to life. Tires squealed against the driveway. And I was alone. I walked back to the dining room, to the table still set with grandmother's china and crystal glasses that no one had touched. I sat down in my chair at the head of the table and looked at the empty seats. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired and sad. And underneath all of it, something I hadn't felt in 4 years, free. 6 months is a long time when you're waiting. It's also no time at all when you're learning to live again. After the meeting, after the slammed doors and the empty house, I thought I might collapse. I thought the silence would swallow me whole. For the first 3 days, I barely moved from the living room couch, wrapped in one of Robert's old cardigans, watching the willow tree sway in the October wind. But on the 4th day, I woke up and realized something strange. The silence didn't hurt anymore. It just was. Like the house had exhaled, finally, after holding its breath for years. I started small. I cleaned out Robert's closet, something I'd been avoiding since the funeral. I donated his suits to a shelter downtown, keeping only his favorite sweater, the gray one with the patched elbow that he refused to throw away. I reorganized the kitchen, gave away the serving platters I'd never use again, bought myself flowers for the first time in my life, instead of waiting for someone else to remember. I started volunteering at the Willow Creek Library on Tuesday afternoons, helping elderly patrons navigate the computer system. There was something healing about it, being useful, being needed, being seen as something other than a checkbook with a heartbeat. Manny and Frank became my unlikely companions. Every other Thursday, the 3 of us would meet at a little Italian place downtown, sharing pasta and wine and stories about Robert. They made me laugh. They let me cry. They never once treated me like a fragile thing that might break. I redecorated the breakfast nook. New curtains, yellow, cheerful, nothing like the muted beige Tiffany had once called sophisticated. I bought a small radio and started listening to jazz in the mornings, the way Robert used to before the newspaper and the coffee and the quiet routines of marriage. I was learning to be alone without being lonely. It was harder than I expected, and easier too. But every night before bed, I checked my phone. No messages from Caleb, no calls, nothing. I told myself I was prepared for this, that he might never come back, that Tiffany's grip might be stronger than his conscience, stronger than his love, stronger than the photograph I'd pressed into his hand. Some nights I believed it. Most nights I didn't. The knock came on a Tuesday. April had arrived soft and wet, the kind of spring that made the willow tree glow electric green against gray skies. I was in the kitchen, washing the breakfast dishes, when I heard it, 3 quiet raps against the front door. I dried my hands, walked to the hallway, looked through the peephole, and there was my son. He looked different, thinner, paler. The confident posture Tiffany had drilled into him was gone, replaced by something hunched and uncertain. He was wearing an old jacket I recognized from his college years, and he was holding something in his hands. I opened the door. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other. This woman and this man, who had once been mother and child, who had somehow become strangers, who were now standing on the threshold of something neither of us could name. "Mom," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "Caleb." I left her. He swallowed hard. 3 months ago. I've been staying with a friend from work, trying to figure out how to come here, what to say. I didn't move, didn't invite him in, not yet. And what did you figure out? He looked down at his hands, at the thing he was holding. I realized it was the photograph, the one of him and Robert, worn now, the edges soft from handling. That I'm sorry. His voice was barely a whisper. That I was a coward. That I let her convince me you were the problem because it was easier than admitting I'd married someone cruel. That I watched her hurt you for years and did nothing because I was afraid of what would happen if I spoke up. He finally met my eyes. There were tears streaming down his face. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for the trust. I'm asking if there's any way at all that you can forgive me. And I stood in the doorway, feeling the spring breeze against my back, looking at my son, my boy, the child I'd nursed through fevers and heartbreaks, the man who had liked a message telling me to disappear. Forgiveness, I said slowly, is not something I can give you today. His face crumpled. But, I continued, it might be something you can earn. He looked up. You'll have to work for it, Caleb. You'll have to show me, not tell me, show me, that you understand what you did, that you've changed, that you're willing to be the man your father raised you to be, not the man Tiffany tried to make you. I will. He nodded desperately. I will, Mom. I swear. No swearing, no promises, just action. I stepped back from the doorway. You can start by coming inside. I haven't had lunch yet, and you look like you haven't had a proper meal in months. He laughed, a wet, broken sound, and stepped across the threshold. War. We sat in the breakfast nook, the same table where it all began. I made grilled cheese sandwiches, the way I used to when he was a boy. He ate 2 of them without speaking, and I watched the color slowly return to his face. The girls miss you, he said finally. They ask about you all the time. Tiffany told them you were sick, that you couldn't have visitors. I closed my eyes. Lily and Rose, 8 years old, 9 now, growing up without me. We'll fix that, I said. Slowly, carefully, but we'll fix it. He nodded, reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph again, setting it on the table between us. I've carried this every day since the meeting. I look at it when I forget who I'm supposed to be. I picked up the photograph. Robert's face, frozen in joy. Caleb's small hands gripping his father's hair. My own laughter, captured just out of frame. Your father, I said, would be proud of you for coming here today. Would he? He would. He'd be furious about the rest of it, probably would have yelled at you for an hour straight, but he'd be proud of this, of the choice you made. Caleb wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I want to be better, Mom. Then be better, starting now, starting here. 1 year later. I turned 63 on a Tuesday. The breakfast nook was set for 4, me, Caleb, and 2 giggling girls who had spent the morning making a birthday card with more glitter than any card had a right to contain. Grandma, open it, Lily demanded, bouncing in her chair. You have to read it out loud, Rose added. I opened the card carefully, glitter cascading onto the tablecloth. Inside, in wobbly handwriting, Happy birthday, Grandma. We love you to the moon and back. Love, Lily and Rose, and Dad helped. I looked up at my son, who was watching me with something soft and hopeful in his eyes. He was still earning his way back. We both knew that. There were hard conversations still to come, wounds that would take years to fully heal. But he was here. They were here. Outside, the willow tree swayed in the spring breeze, its branches reaching toward the sky. I was 63 years old. I was surrounded by family, and for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Well, I said, brushing glitter from my fingers, who wants cake?